Welcome, everyone. It's promptly 2 o'clock. Well, it's 2 o'clock my time. I'm on Pacific time, and it is 5 o'clock East Coast, and we have people from all over the country, maybe all over the world. So who knows what time it is where you are, but we're just going to give everyone one more minute, and then I'm going to start talking and then release this to our presenter. Okay. This is great so far. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're just giving another minute in case anybody else wants to join. Don't want to leave anybody out. They're just scurrying to their computer. Great. Got a couple people just trailing on in here. This is awesome. Not surprised at all that we have a lot of people joining. Okay. Well, here we go. Another person. All right, everyone, I'm going to go ahead and get started. And bear with me as I multitask and admit people into this presentation. So welcome to our Wild Horse Advocacy Summit. This is our second presentation, and here I go, just admitting everybody wants to be in. This is just our second presentation, and this is my first presentation to moderate, so bear with me. You are at putting the A in advocacy, arming yourself with knowledge to effectively advocate this year in 2025. I don't know how the heck it's 2025, but it is. And this event is being put on by Chris Kman at Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates and by Heather Hellier at Save Our Wild Horses. And I'm going to admit a couple more people. And hosted / moderated by me. My name is Jen Caudle, and I am with the Wild Narrative Project. So you are all here to talk to Chris Kman today. She is going, well, to hear from her, and she's going to present on making it an issue, building a relationship with your legislators. Chris is someone that I have had the pleasure of getting to know this past year. She's the co-founder and president of Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates. She's a graduate of DePaul University with a degree in journalism, which you're quickly going to understand makes a lot of sense if you don't know Chris, because she is sharp and she knows what questions to ask, which is why you are in the right place. In December of 2022, when Theodore Roosevelt National Park announced their plans to eliminate the entire herd of horses from the park, Chris went to work, sounding the alarm with followers and starting to interact with the media. She started working with state and federal legislators, asking for them to advocate for Chasing Horses, Wild Horse Advocates, to keep the state's only wild herd in the park. And her efforts paid off, which if you go to chwha.org, you will learn a whole lot more. And I'm sure that Chris is going to give you a quick background on the Theodore Roosevelt Wild Horses and her advocacy and her group's advocacy over the last few years. Really quickly, in April 2024, the park announced that they would be abandoning their environmental process, which meant that they were again going to put the horses, well, they were going to leave them, and then later on in the year, well, Chris will tell you, the horses have been under threat again. So Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates work is ongoing. Chris has made an amazing amount of progress, and so has her advocacy group. And I have been very lucky to become a part of her world. And for those of you that don't know Chris, Chris is a champion for cooperation and collaboration, and really happy that she's here today presenting. So Chris, without further ado, I did that in 3 minutes. That's not bad.
Thank
I
you.
am going to pass it over to you. And do I need to do anything to pass it back to you?
I don't think so,
Okay,
but thank you.
absolutely.
Oh, hold on a minute. I wasn't quite ready.
No
I had
worries.
ev I had everything ready except for my main presentation, so that's great. Uh,
Okay, great, because you always have it together. So you're like taking the pressure off just a little bit for the rest of us that are going to be fumbling a little bit.
okay. Did I hit screen share? Can you guys see my screen? No. Okay. I did
Not
that
yet.
last time. Let me see.
I'm gonna stop my share, Chris. Oh, there you go.
Got it.
Great.
Yep. Okay. Thank you, Jen, for the introduction. Um, Hello and welcome to Make It an Issue, Building a Relationship with Your Legislators. My name is Chris Kman. I am the president and co-founder of Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates. I have to admit, while I can absolutely appreciate how far our fight for the spirit of the Badlands has come, I always feel weird talking about what I did because in all truthfulness, I don't believe that I did anything extraordinary and definitely not something that every single one of you could not also do if you chose to. This is a photo of me and my. I want to give a shout out to him because I am truly blessed to have a wonderful husband who not only supports the work that I do, but he is equally, even though it's silently, involved in all aspects of what we do at CHWHA. And if you were in the last presentation that we had with Wayne, he referred to his wife or said that his wife referred to herself as a wild horse widow. And I'm sure that Gary could completely relate to that. Um, we took this photo in April of 2019 when we opened our small business called Chasing Horses in Medora, North Dakota. We moved to North Dakota in 2016 from Illinois. So we'd only been in North Dakota for 2 years before we opened our store. We were quite content in learning the ins and outs of our new life as entrepreneurs. We were not involved in politics. I honestly had no idea that North Dakota legislators were only in session every other year. I grew up in Chicago, so it was easy to just assume that politics go on all day, everywhere. We had no idea who our legislators were. I don't even think we knew what district we lived in. We were one of those people who voted, but you usually have no idea who most of the people on the ballot are anyway, outside of the president or federal legislators. I'll click a few boxes and I'll give me my sticker and I'll see you in a couple years, right? In December of 2022, everything changed. Theodore Roosevelt National Park announced that they plan to eliminate the entire herd of wild horses from the park. I fell to my knees. I talked to our lawyers who explained the process we were now a huge part of. I cried. We cried, my husband right along with me. How were we going to save this wild horse herd? Was it even possible? I had absolutely no idea, but I did know we only had one chance to save them. We had to get this right, and we had to do everything we could to, at the very least, try. A great friend that I've made along this journey to save the wild horses of TRMP told me I should open every single one of my talks with this video from January 17th, 2025. So I will take his advice because Wally is rarely wrong, and I'll be back in a few minutes to move forward with the presentation. So be patient with me as I try to have my tech savviness here. Not. I think I have too many open windows.
That happens to me all the time, Chris.
Hmm.
Let's see, Chris, I can't hear what's on your
Okay.
screen. I'm not sure if everyone else can. Can somebody throw in the chat whether or not they can hear, please?
I can tell you, Jen, that I don't have any sound either.
Okay,
Hey,
thank you.
let me see what I can do.
Okay, take your time.
Let's see. It is. All right, let's start over. Can you hear now? Can you guys hear now?
No.
Why?
Oh, someone is saying yes, so perhaps it's someone on our end. Something on our end. Okay, let's see. Someone's saying volume up. It looks like you have your volume up.
Okay. Well, I have a graphic for this anyway. So
Okay.
let's go back to stop share. Let's just go back to this. Okay. Can you see the screen now? Did I share it right? Yes?
Yep.
Okay. That was one of our North Dakota senators, John Hoeven. So for anyone who couldn't hear, I do have the language up here in this graphic. That was one of our North Dakota senators, John Hoeven. He was speaking with our former North Dakota Governor, Doug Burgum, at the Senate confirmation hearings, considering Doug Burgum for the role of Secretary of the Interior. I cannot tell you how incredible this moment feels. It's huge. And Wally reminds me of this regularly. I have a hard time believing that I led a group of people that elevated their voices and continue to work for real change on an issue important to all of us. I've shared this Margaret Mead quote often over the last few years, and I really do believe this. And there's one person from the press who has asked me a lot of times, like, last word, what is your last word? And it's always this, because it really is a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens that changed the world. And that's what we did. And we changed it absolutely for the wild horses of Theodore Roosevelt National Park. So I still have a really hard time wrapping my head around how much progress we've made, but it was quite the journey to get here. Since I shared the Margaret Mead quote, I'm going to make a confession. I am a quote lover. I have to share this one. I won't read it. Most of you, I'm sure, know it. But this quote also helped me over the years. Yeah, man, marred by dust and sweat and blood, 100%. And I'm sure more than I ever let the world see. Were there ever times when things didn't go the way we planned? Absolutely. We stepped into the arena 100% in 2022, and we have not stepped out. Do we have any idea what we're doing? Most of the time, honestly, no. We learned as we went along. When we failed, we got up, we dusted ourselves off and tried again. This part gets me every time. Have we had some pretty incredible wins? Absolutely. And who, at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly? We were not giving up on our wild horses without a fight. See all these people? They are state and federal legislators, former governors, they're gubernatorial candidates, and now those people even include our new Secretary of the Interior. There's some of the everyone and anyone I talked to that would listen as to why we needed their help to save this historic herd of wild horses. I did not know any of these people prior to December of 2022. Today, most of them have my number saved in their phones, so when I call, they answer, "Hello, Christine, how are you?" Or sometimes when they answer, I'll say, "Hello, it's your favorite constituent," and they'll laugh and say, "Hi, Chris, how are you?" Admittedly, sometimes they also let my call go to voicemail. Over the years, I've had several people contact me asking for my help to replicate what we did in North Dakota, wherever they are. When I start telling them the things that I'm going to share with you today, I get very frustrated when I hear them say that'll never work here, as they go on with a long list of excuses on why they won't. I thought about that as I was preparing for this presentation. Would everything that we accomplished still have been possible if I lived in Chicago? You know, did all of this happen up here in North Dakota where everyone is North Dakota nice. Then I remembered something else that happened in my life. It seems like a lifetime ago back in Chicago. I was working in an office and we had a fire hydrant outside the building that leaked so bad all year long. In the winter, it froze into a horrific, never-ending mound of ice. No one was fixing this. We were all irritated and annoyed every day as we went to work, and every day we came back the next morning to the leaky fire hydrant. One day I started making calls to a local politician. You know what happened? Pretty quickly after my call, the fire hydrant got fixed. Why? This is the key. None of our legislators know that there is a problem unless we tell them. This local politician does not regularly drive down the street where I worked, but I did every single day. And every single day I looked at that leaky hydrant and thought, geez, can't someone fix this? Never realizing that someone also included me. Our legislators, local, county, state, and federal, all depend on us to tell them what the problem is and when we can, some possible solutions. Just like the fire hydrant in Chicago, they have no idea what the problems are if we don't tell them. We all too often make the mistake of thinking these people we elect into office literally know everything. Isn't that in their job description somewhere? I know that's what I thought. The biggest thing I've learned over the last few years is that our legislators only know what we tell them. If we tell them nothing, well, then expect the fire hydrant to continue to leak until you decide it's time for it to be fixed. In my last presentation on this topic, I talked about taking advice from Mr. Rogers, find the helpers. When the announcement first came in 2022, I thought, who can help? I looked at who had helped us in the past. Obviously, I reached out to our federal legislators. They were still making blanket statements for people to make sure they took their time to comment, etc. Right? You're just so frustrated. So I started thinking. I reached out to our local chamber of commerce. We've worked with them in the past. Maybe they had some thoughts, and of course they did. They always do. They always help us find creative ways to get in front of people and plead our case. But a big thing was they also let us know about a lot of events that they were hosting that put us in front of our legislators, which was really kind of key too. I will also say that I'm told a lot, that I'm clear and concise when I speak and very respectful. Those are also extremely important things and a huge part of why we're doing this summit. We are all very passionate about wild horses. Passion is good, it sparks change. But we also need to be calm and have factual information to share as we move forward and continue to fight for wild horses and burros everywhere. There was one newly elected state senator who was a regular photographer and visitor to the park. We knew them as well as waving to him as we passed by each other in the park. I called him and asked for his advice. It was his first year as a state legislator, so he wasn't comfortable introducing the legislation, but he helped me connect with other legislators in our area. I literally went down these lines and called every single legislator in our state, I believe, until I got somebody to agree to sponsor and co-sponsor our resolution in 2023. I was extremely nervous. And in those moments when I was nervous, I simply reminded myself that we get one chance to save this herd. What if this phone call was the one that took care of this aspect of things for me? I also want to say that while we were lobbying in Washington, D.C. the first time, several congressional staffers told us that having the state resolution was a very powerful tool in our advocacy toolkit. We had no idea. Many of our state legislators had no idea either. They thought we were all doomed because this was a federal agency and the states have no jurisdiction over federal agencies. While that's true, it doesn't mean that if our voices are loud enough, we cannot create change. A few congressional staffers also told us that if we could even drill the state down to cities and counties, that was also powerful. I think this is a huge miss on our part as advocates. We always think big. I have a problem and we take that problem to our federal legislators. I can tell you that taking issues to a city, county, and state officials or legislators also helps get the attention of our federal legislators, sometimes a lot more than we realize. I believe it can be even more impactful. Let's be honest, Senator Hovind's a busy guy. He has priorities he's working on to help our state. It's not like he lacks issues, right? The horses remain his priority because we have made it an issue. Senator Hoeven has heard from individuals and organizations from literally all across the globe about the TRMP wild horses. He's heard from the state of North Dakota. He's heard from Billings County. He has heard from the city of Medora. When the fire hydrant was leaking back in Chicago, I didn't call my federal legislator to complain. I called the local government offices and reported it to them. Again, we have to look at our advocacy in the same way. How do we make our concerns an issue with our state and local legislators? The state of North Dakota is one of 4 states that's only in session once every 2 years. Once the 2023 session was over, if I had concerns, I went to the Medora City Council meetings. This is as easy as calling your local city councils and asking to be put on the agenda. I was nervous when I started attending these as well. Again, I didn't know any of these people. I did know that tourism was a big thing, and they knew that the horses were driving tourism in the state. I also had to educate them. Why was it important that they pass a resolution? You know, we need to keep letting Senator Hoeven know what the state and specifically the town of Medora wants. Every time a new issue came up while our state legislators were not in session, I called and asked to be put on the agenda for city council meetings. At different points over the last 3 years, the Medora City Council has passed 3 resolutions asking for a viable herd of horses to remain in the park. All of those resolutions go to our state and federal legislators. That carries a lot more weight than me calling my federal legislators myself. Now that our now that our state legislators are back in session, you better believe that those local resolutions will be part of my testimony for the 2025 session. The other thing I want to add is that when we see our federal legislators on television, sometimes it gets overwhelming thinking that we'll be talking to someone so important, right? The truth is, for the number of times that I've called or had meetings with Senator Hoeven's office, I believe it was only once that I actually met with Senator Hoeven himself. The rest of the time, they have a staffer for whatever your issue is. Your job is to talk to that staffer and convince them that your issue is important. I feel like I said a lot, so let me streamline some of this for you. So number 1, contact local and state legislators and ask for help. Start building relationships with them. When you contact their offices or them directly, ask to schedule a meeting with them. This can be in person, over Zoom, over Teams, or on the phone. Find out when your city council meetings are and just call to ask that you be put on the agenda for the meeting. Clearly and calmly state your issue and be prepared to tell them how they can help or what you would like them to do. If you have materials that you can send them ahead of your scheduled meeting, that can be helpful so they can review it and be familiar with your concerns. And then do the same thing with your federal legislators. It's really important to have an established relationship with all of your legislators. I can tell you that here in North Dakota, we just got a new congresswoman. Our Congressman Kelly Armstrong became Governor Armstrong, and so his office was open. And I've already called and had meetings with with her office, not because I have any issue I want her to help with, but just so that I can start establishing that relationship. When you call your federal legislator, you can ask for the person who handles wild horse and burro issues or animal welfare issues. They'll either let you know how to contact them, they'll take a message and have them contact you, or they'll connect you with a scheduler who can set up a meeting. Again, you can meet either in person or virtually or even over the phone. I found this slide when I was putting my presentation together. I left it as it was, so credit to the University of Kansas. I felt good after I read this because I've done this with all of my legislators, and this doesn't happen overnight and it takes time to develop. So what exactly do we mean by developing a relationship? The legislator staff should recognize your name. You have the opportunity to speak to the legislator in person. You should be the first person the legislator's office thinks to call when he or she needs information about your issue. The legislator should be willing to support your issue. Remember, our relationships require compromise. Every resolution, bill, even negotiating during the roundup in October of 2024, we never get every single thing we want. Every piece of legislation we've worked on has changed from what we originally submitted. We all have an idea of what proper wild horse management looks like. So does our federal government that's charged with managing these horses. Nobody likes change, right? Sometimes it's easier to change things one small piece at a time instead of all at once. Be willing to listen and compromise. It will help build a better relationship with your legislators. So how else can you get your legislators' attention? Contact the media. When the park made their announcement, my husband and I waited a couple days to see if the media was going to report on the park getting ready to um, eliminate all the horses. When the media wasn't reporting anything, I actually got on the phone and called every media outlet, newspaper, television in the state, and said, hey, are you aware that Theodore Roosevelt National Park just announced that they were planning to get rid of the horses in the park? And then that's how I started building relationships with our media. Write letters to the editor. We know our state and federal legislators look at these. When the park made their announcement in 2022, there was not a day that went by that someone did not have a letter to the editor published in one of our state's papers expressing their outrage. Our state legislators caught wind of this and admitted some of them were going, uh-oh, even before the session started. It helped them know that they had to take this issue seriously, and it helped them schedule hearings about the horses early on in the session so they can resolve what they could at a state level and move forward with their other business. The other thing is you should tag your legislators in your letters to the editor and on your social media posts. We do know for sure that federal legislators especially do look at this and pay attention to when they're being called out in the local paper or on social media. Contact your local Associated Press reporter. This is another important relationship to maintain. The job of the Associated Press reporters are to take their state issues to a national level. So I'm in regular contact with our AP reporter. He doesn't always write an article, but he does like to stay up to date on the issue. I want to get ready to close here by sharing this graphic from Heather at Save Our Wild Horses. In 1971, when the Wild and Free Roaming Wild Horse and Burro Act was created, we had 329 wild horse herds across 53.8 million acres of land that was set aside for them. As of 2024, 53 years later, we now have 165 herds and 26.9 million acres of our public lands. And we know that there are plans to eliminate or significantly reduce more herds in 2025. This graphic is available on Heather's website at saveourwildhorses.net. It's too late for the horse herds that are crossed off in red here. We don't get them back. We have one chance to save the ones that remain. Just like the leaky fire hydrant, they need you to speak up and let your elected officials on every level know that there's a problem. It's too late when the helicopters go up, and in most cases, it's way too late when the EA comes out. We sincerely hope that throughout the next 5 days, you take advantage of the opportunity to learn from the subject matter experts we brought together for you during this summit and find your own voice to help spark change for our wild horses and burros. It's time for change for sure. It's up to us to make the inhumane treatment of our wild horses and burros an issue to everyone who will listen. I'm going to attempt again to play another video. If it doesn't work, then I'll just stop and we'll share it another time and try to figure out why that's not working. But I did ask one of our North Dakota senators, Senator John Hoeven, to speak at our summit. He wasn't able to attend in person, but he did send along this message. It ties in nicely to what I talked about. So I'm going to try to switch my screen share again. And like I said, hopefully the video works. If not, we will share it with the rest of the summit videos. Can you guys hear it? Anyone?
I can't.
Heather, anybody? Can you?
No, I can't hear it either.
What is going on? Well, here, let me. No?
No, I'm trying to see if I can figure out why.
Let me see. Is that? No. I don't think that's it.
heard it for just a second, Chris.
Yes, no? You didn't hear it?
I thought I heard it for just a second, but no, not currently.
Hmm. All right, well, I don't know. I don't know why it wouldn't be working. No thoughts on why it's not working, Jen?
Do you want me to try from my computer, Chris, and see if I can get it to play?
You can.
And then Vicky suggests selecting share computer sound.
Where do I do that at?
That's a good question. Vicky, speak up again for us. Let's
Is it here?
see. Ooh, Carrie's got a nice tutorial over here. She says, on the meeting toolbar, click share screen, you're there. The share selection window will appear. Select the program or desktop you wish to share. In the share selection window, select share sound.
All right, let me see. Share. Okay, I see. Oh, I see. No, it won't let me. It won't let me click it. Any reason we think of for that?
I don't know.
Hmm.
I recommend we add this file to your website and send everyone to your website to hear it.
Well, we'll see if Heather has luck. She's got the video also, so
Great.
we can see if that works, but
Yeah, let me try sharing. So I'm in the share window. Select the program. That one. And in the share selection window, click share sound. Share sound.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me to your conference. It's a pleasure to speak with you today. Our wild horses are an integral part of the history and visitor experience at Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Importantly, this is the only U.S. national park named after an individual, so it makes sense we would honor the life and service of President Teddy Roosevelt by preserving this historic scene as he experienced it during his formative years in the Dakota Territory. That's why we've been working to maintain the wild horses at the park. To this end, we repeatedly raised this priority with officials at the National Park Service, securing commitments from key leaders to ensure a healthy and genetically viable herd over the long term. We continue working to make sure the Park Service is transparent and the public knows what the plans are for managing the herd. One critical part of our effort is the legislation that we passed as part of the annual funding bills directing the Park Service to maintain the wild horses, similar to Teddy Roosevelt's time as a rancher in the area. On a broader note, this is a great example of how I can leverage my position on the Senate Appropriations Committee to advance the interests of North Dakotans. The appropriations bills that I and my fellow committee members craft each year provide an opportunity to provide direction and influence decision-making at federal agencies like the National Park Service. By exercising our constitutional role to oversee annual discretionary funding at federal agencies, we can hold officials accountable, ensure they act in accordance with existing law, and withhold funds for activities that violate congressional intent. As I've discussed with wild horse advocates and stakeholders, I'll continue to use this position to make sure the Park Service follows through on its commitments. At the same time, we're working to get Governor Burgum confirmed as Interior Secretary. He had his first vote yesterday, and it went very well. We hope to have his confirmation completed today. Having Doug in this role will help ensure we have a long-term management plan that keeps a healthy, diverse herd of horses at the park for future generations to enjoy. Thank you to everyone gathered here today for your continued efforts in support of our wild horses at Theodore Roosevelt National Park. Best wishes for an enjoyable and productive event.
Thank you, Heather. Um, I'm going to end with a quote by Brene Brown. If you read any of her work, you know she references the man in the arena quote from the beginning of the presentation a lot in her work. I'll leave you with her words. Get in the arena, show up, do your thing, and don't be afraid to get your ass kicked a little bit. As advocates, we have to be all in. We have to know that we will get our asses kicked, but we cannot stop showing up for our wild horse and burros. Thank you guys for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was awesome. We do have some questions, so I'm gonna shoot them on over to you. Let's see. Linda wants to know, she asks, do you suggest meeting with both wild horse / public lands and also the aide that does animal issues? So perhaps she can clarify for us, but what I think she's asking is also, aside from legislators, is it worth speaking with employees, individuals, or teams that help manage certain areas that reflect, that have to do with this issue?
Yeah, and I think that when you call your legislator's office, and you let them know, what your issue is or what it is that you want to talk about. So if you let them know, like, for example, we met with Governor Burgum's office. I went before he left office, I think the end of November, beginning of December, to show him legislation. I'm sorry, to show him legislation that we were working on, that's going to be a part of the 2025 session, just to get feedback from them. And when I went, I met with his chief of staff, who I normally talk to, but he also had his policy advisor there, because that person knows, like, hey, since we're talking about policy, is this right? This is what you should do. This is how you should navigate through the North Dakota legislative process. So they'll let you know that. There are also times when I talk to Senator Hoven's office. Sometimes I talk to his chief of staff in Washington, D.C. Other times I talk to people in his office in Watford City. So it just depends on what I'm asking for, but usually the office will know who you need to refer them to, or even, there's times when I'm talking to Eric at Hoven's office and he'll say, well, I'm going to put you in touch with so-and-so that handles that. So really, the person who answers the phone will help you navigate who you need to talk to. And if it's not that person, then the scheduler will. But it doesn't hurt to have a relationship with all of them. And something I found out that kind of helps show that is, I said that we had gotten a new congresswoman. And when I met with her, I think it was her legislative assistant, or staffer, he told me that he actually came from Senator Hoven's office. He knows exactly who I am. He sat close to Eric, who I talked to all the time at Hoven's office. And he said, I know all about the issues. I know who you are. I know what you've been working on. I know Senator Hoven's stance on it. He said, I'm not as engrossed with it as Eric was. That wasn't my job there. So I thought that was pretty cool. And then when we met with the new governor's people, he told me that he also was from Senator Hoven's office. He knows who I am. He knows what the issues are. He knows where Senator Hoven's stance is on this. So even though I've never talked to these people, they know who I am, because we've just raised such an issue and helped elevate that issue within those offices.
That's really helpful. Thank you, Chris. Okay, we've got a few more questions. Stephanie says, I'm on the East Coast. Other than arguing with my senator that wild horses are a federal issue, how do I argue to my state House rep that issues like CAWP, are within his realm to act on?
I think again, they're not going to know it's an issue unless we make it an issue. So, for example, when last year, so we have legislation going into the 2025 session. We have two pieces of legislation, and I met with our House Majority Leader last year and started talking to him and said, "Hey, so yeah, they kept the horses, right? That's great." Um, and so he thought that we were good, right? So we can just move on. He doesn't have to hear from me anymore. And I said, "Well, no, because if we don't take this momentum we have and try to get federal protection, they're just going to be back. It's going to be a matter of time, and they're going to be trying to get rid of the horses again." And so when I said it to him that way, he thought, "Well, no, you're right. Like he doesn't want to do this again, right?" It was a long 3 years for all of us, that were I don't know, in the front lines fighting. It's been exhausting. The same thing too, even now as Governor Burgum was appointed as Secretary of the Interior, some of our legislators thought, well, we don't have to do anything now because we got Burgum as Secretary of the Interior. And I was, no, we do have to do something. We have to take advantage of this opportunity. So again, if I would have left them alone, they would have thought, Burgum's going to take care of it. It's good. We're fine. So it's just keeping the issue in front of them, having factual information, which is again, things that you should have a wealth of that by the time this summit is over with, but being able to share that information and let them know. Your state legislators, your county legislators, those things really help elevate your voice, because now it's just not, Chris Kman calling Hoven's office. It's the North Dakota state legislators saying, "Hey, we have a resolution now and we would like federal protection for these horses." It's a lot more, obviously, weight than just me as an individual person or even us as our organization. So you just have to find the way to keep educating them and making them understand that it's an issue to you, and as many people as you can get. That's the big thing. We got a unified voice of people saying the same thing, over and over again. So if your legislators are getting calls from numerous people, and I think, Heather, you can jump in and say, I call it the toilet paper math. Like for every person that calls a politician's office, they equate it to there's X amount of people, and it's a lot that also have the same issue. So the more people that are calling, that's the other thing too, is just elevating your voice.
I think that's great. And I wonder if that's related to, so Craig has a question. How can we make sure that the legislator themselves are supportive of the wild horses and burros in the wild, not just compromised away to oblivion?
And I think, again, this is where we have to really build relationships with our local people and with our state people, and then also, of course, federal legislators. But that's what we did here. So like I said, in the beginning of the fight for the Theodore Roosevelt horses, I called our federal legislators, and all they were saying was, make sure that you get your comments in. That's really important. We're just encouraging everyone to get their comments in. And it was like, no, why aren't we doing something else, right? So it was when we got the state involved, like the staffers, when we visited DC, said, that became a powerful tool in our toolkit, because while it's a federal issue, if the state is saying, "Hey, this is what the federal government's trying to do, but we think that it should be this," then Congress generally will start listening to that, because why is the federal government, are they overreaching? You know what I mean? Are there things like that need to be looked at? And in the case here, and I think it's the same in a lot of places, where tourism plays a factor, here in North Dakota, we're the least visited state. So if we have something that brings people to North Dakota, the state is all for that, right? So sometimes it's just finding those little things like that just get people and get them involved. But definitely, if you can get people at a state level involved, county levels even, that could help amplify the voice.
That's great. Thank you. Heather actually also asks, she says, "Chris, what would you say to people who comment that they have written to their legislator, but they never hear back, or they just receive a form letter?"
So there have been times over the last few years where I've sent letters to our federal legislators, and they've sent me back a form letter, of course, about, of course I like wild horses on the Western range, blah, blah, blah. And one of our legislators went into a whole big thing about how, um, range health and this and this and that. And I emailed them back. Just because you get a form letter doesn't mean you can't email somebody back. I replied and said, hey, I got this form letter. Number one, I'm not talking about wild horses on the Western range. I'm talking about wild horses in Theodore Roosevelt National Park. But, as the president of Chasing Horses Wild Horse Advocates, I would be happy to share this letter with our followers and let them know that this is your stand on the wild horses in the park. And they were like, "Ooh, wait a minute." You have to let them know the form letter isn't applying. Again, it's being loud, and it's letting them know, like, hey, that's not what I was talking about. I think that we have a real big misconception. And when you think about like the basics of it, and I do always tell people, and I'll say this over and over and over again, and maybe just because, I was a child that grew up in the 70s, but Schoolhouse Rock has an I'm Just a Bill video. And that shows very clearly how we get laws changed. And one of the things in there it says is before anything is even a bill, a group of people back home call their congressman and say, hey, I think that this should happen. And then the congressman goes, oh, okay. So they made it an issue. So again, the communication with our legislators is important, but also understand their job. We hire them every election day, right? And we hire them to represent us, whether it's in our county, our state, our city, or the federal government, right? So if I'm not happy with something, I should be able to go to my legislator and say, hey, this is happening, and what can we do about it, right? Sometimes maybe there's nothing that can be done. I can tell you that part of the legislative process I have learned, as we go through and we get these bills and resolutions passed, the first thing that happens once we get a draft that we all agree on, it goes to legislative council and they look at it to see, hey, are we within the guidelines of North Dakota law, right? So there's all of that stuff that goes into it, but it's taking that first step. And again, the relationships are important, and understanding these people work for us. Same thing with Senator Hoeven and any of our federal legislators. Their jobs are to take our voice here in North Dakota to Washington, D.C. and create change that's positive for our state. So that's why in the video where he talked to Governor Burgum and said, hey, we've been working on the horses in the park, and do I have a commitment from you? If we're confirming you as Secretary of the Interior, do I have a commitment from you that you will continue to work with my office to keep these horses in the park? And I can tell you, it's very well known that him and Governor Burgum are good friends. They've known each other for a long time. But I can also tell you that Senator Hoeven has done that a number of times to different people that he's been in front of his committee to be confirmed. So those are also things, again, keeping the issue, on hand. I think most of our legislators will tell you that I don't go away. I mean, if they don't answer me, or if we're not getting anywhere, I call them, I email them, I stay in touch. So just again, the relationship is important, but also understanding that they're working for us. And I think that we miss that.
I think that every point you just made is incredibly important. I'm going to ask you a question that piggybacks off of this, and then we do have a couple more to get to, so I'll make it quick. Okay, so you're just talking, you clearly now understand this process and you have been involved. And so it sounds like you have shed some of the, if you ever had any, because I know you have a background in journalism, but if you ever had any apprehension about walking up to your legislator or having an actual phone call, do you have advice for advocates? No matter how passionate you can be about an issue, sometimes it's hard from personality to personality to actually speak up, to literally raise your voice, to make the phone call, to make an in-person meeting. Do you have like a pep talk that people can keep in the back of their minds for physically making those touch points and developing those relationships?
So I'm going to tell you, my husband was really shocked. Um, when we first started talking to the media, I was mostly talking to people on the phone, or we would talk over Zoom, and it was really, a lot less scary for me. And so one day we had to drive to Bismarck to go meet with a number of television stations, like on set and live. And I think I was probably hyperventilating for the hour and a half ride to Bismarck. And my husband was laughing. He's like, "What is your problem? You talk to the press all the time." I'm like, "Not in the studio. Like, what if I sound like an idiot? What if I say the wrong thing? What if I'm wondering now if I'm going to freeze up because I'm like so nervous. Like, I have to go to the bathroom. We had to keep stopping at gas stations." So I've been there and I understand it. But again, like I said, for me, the underlying thing was that if I keep my mouth shut, what happens if these horses are taken from the park? Because we know the park has been trying since they were fenced in to get rid of them. So if they get the chance to take these horses out of this park, they will never be returned again. They're never, ever, ever going to bring those horses back. So we have to stop that. So what wouldn't you do to stop that from happening? Right? We have to fight sooner, and we have to just really, the pep talk is for me was always, we get one chance to save them. What if this person is the person that's going to make a difference? um and you never know when that's going to be. And I can tell you that some pretty incredible people, I mean, amazing people, have crossed my path over the last couple of years. And a lot of that came from just taking that first step and saying, "Hey, my name's Chris." I'll also tell you a story. And it was one of the last times that I talked to Governor Burgum in person. I was at um, a luncheon that the Theodore Roosevelt Library Foundation was holding, and they were actually having a speaker that was an author that I was reading a book on. And so I was excited to go and just hear this author because I thought that was great. And it was a luncheon that they supported. And I told my husband and my mom, "Hey, we should all go, and like this will be fun." And so when we were there, this was in the midst of the October roundup that the park had planned. And when I walked into the room, I was like, "Oh my God," like everybody in the world I could possibly think of that I wanted to talk to. Tourism, the mayor of Medora, the city council people, the heads of different organizations throughout the state. I was like, "Oh my God, this is incredible. I can't wait for this talk to be over because I'm going to have to work the room, right?" Um, and then lo and behold, up on the stage comes Governor Burgum. And I was like, "Oh my God," right? I told my husband, I'm like, as soon as he comes off that stage, I'm making a beeline over there and I'm talking to him because we only had like about another week left to try to stop that roundup. And I did that. And I can tell you again, for Governor Burgum, very approachable. He knew who I was. I was like, "Is there anything that you can do to help?" And he's like, "Let's go over here and talk to my chief of staff and let's see what's going on and where things are with him." So again, um, I haven't ever really talked to him before. Again, I've talked to his chief of staff, but I had one chance, right? We had a week left to try to stop that roundup. We weren't successful in stopping the roundup, but we got a lot of different things changed. And again, that's where the compromise comes in, right?
Those are really good stories, and I think will give people the pep talk and the courage they need. That's because you're right. You've got one chance. They're not putting wild horses back on the
Yep.
range after they
No,
take them
they're
on
not.
in
No.
the vast majority of instances. Okay, I don't want to miss this question. This is from Cheryl. What if you're in a state with no wild horse or burros, but want to advocate for no roundups, no adoption incentive program, etc.? Do you still recommend doing something with your local and state legislators? She says, "I already have contacts with my US Congress delegations and have their emails and phone numbers and have interacted with them regarding the SAFE Act."
So what I would just recommend always to have a relationship with your state legislators. Um, I I cherish the relationships I have with my state legislators. Um, and it could be a couple different things. So one is, while they may not be advocating with you for wild horses, they may be able to help you learn different ways to navigate through, or different ways for you to get through to your federal legislator or other federal legislators. You know what I mean? Or um, you never know too. It's possible they may know a state or local legislator in the state where you're having issues at. Again, I can't tell you the amount of people that really literally have fallen from the sky in my life to help us as we went through things. But I think, again, just establishing those relationships, because there are legislators that I've talked to that have helped me more than anything understand the process, understand, hey, this is what's happening, and then this is what's going to happen, and this is what you should do now. And I just had that actually with one of our senators with the bill that we had introduced. He said, okay, so this is what's happening. This is what you need to do. This is what you need to have your followers do. And then we're going to just kind of watch what happens in this and this and this. So they can help you with those things, help you understand things better, and also help you navigate things on a federal level. I think that we get confused too. A lot of things that happen on a state level, they happen the same way on the federal level, just at a grander scale, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. Okay, this one is going to be near and dear for you. Jeanette asks, when do we need to have the letters for the North Dakota legislature ready? Do you have a date yet?
I don't have a date yet. I checked before before we started Wayne's presentation today, and they have not assigned a committee yet. I think that one of the senators told us we should get an assignment this week. They should have our legislation in for the bill. It should be heard next Thursday or Friday. So I'm just waiting to hear that for sure. Um, and I would think that I'm hoping that we'll know something tomorrow, and it'll give us about a week to get the legislation. Like I told everybody, write the legislation now. I do have other things for people to do. So do what you can now, and then when it's time, you can just upload it and be done with it and move on to the next thing that's going to help. So
That's great. Heather just made a comment and says, while you were nervous to talk to some of these people, they were just regular people like you and I, right? Which is really good.
absolutely. Absolutely. Especially I think too, when we did the Save Our Wild Horse conference with Heather and Linda a couple of years ago, that was the first time I've ever lobbied Congress. I had no idea what I was doing. I know my friend Karen is on here, and we could tell stories about the insanity of what we did and how we carried so many folders through in a huge suitcase and what we did for that. But we just walked into offices and talked about, the issues, what was happening, and just raised awareness. And that's the other thing too, even for the person who just asked, um, one of the legislative staffers that we talked to the last time said, if there's a way for you to send videos to your legislators showing the helicopter roundups, all these things that we are all appalled about. She said, that's what got it for me. She goes, somehow one of these videos made it across my desk. And I was like, oh my God, what are we doing? So she brings that to her boss, right, who's a congresswoman, and says, hey, look at this is happening. And do you think this is right? And then they start being one of our Congress people who advocate for horses. And you guys heard Senator Hoeven say in the testimony with Governor Burgum, he's a horse person. He loves horses. Governor Burgum loves horses. So we want horses. So, are you going to work with us? And I think that that's why the educating our Congress people is really the biggest thing. So
Great. Okay, I've just got a quick admin question. How are we doing on time? Are we good to keep chatting? Because there are a few more questions.
yeah, we're good to keep chatting.
Great. Okay, so moving slightly, at the moment, we have questions that are a little bit more general and no less important. So Maya wants to know, how can we all collectively collaborate? Is there a coalition of several organizations joining together?
Um, I think that that's something that me and Heather have talked about, and that's probably kind of part of what we're doing here with all of these people that are here for the summit. And that's the biggest thing. We have to be able to look beyond our differences. We have to be able to compromise. We have to be able to see each other's strengths. And I think that that's where we fail as advocates a lot of the time. Heather and I have a lot of conversations about this, and we pep talk each other a lot. And I'm grateful for her friendship and that we can do that with each other. But even within this conference, there's a very diverse group of advocates here, and some of them don't agree with birth control, some of them do, some of them believe one thing, others believe another. But it all has merit, and it doesn't mean that just because you know, I may think that birth control is great, and Jen, you may think that it's not, that we can't find a way to get along and make things work, right?
Right. That's correct. Well, and as in it just, I personally do believe in fertility control, but that's just me personally. But as an example, yes. Mary has a question. She says, Chris, how did you decide to establish 501c3?
Oh, so what happened was we had our store in Medora, and we were, you know, like I said, happily along being entrepreneurs, and we were going to the park, taking pictures, sharing pictures. And every time they were culling horses every year, you know, more and more as our fellowship grew, people started asking, like, what do we do to change this? And we were like, we're just people like you, right, that go to the park. And so more and more people were coming to us and saying, you know, we have to do something, we have to do something, we have to do something. And so that's when we finally decided to start a 501c3 and just advocate for the horses. We were advocating for proper management. And again, we've been fighting for federal protection long before we became a 501c3.
Yeah. Let's see, another question. This is from White Cloud, and they may be referring to the horses that have migrated outside of Montgomery Pass. And I've seen a couple other comments on Montgomery Pass, which for advocates everywhere, that's a herd that was straddling the Nevada-California border that have been migrating east out of their designated area. So White Cloud says, I'm in the Eastern Sierra Mountains of California, and we have a roundup scheduled for 8/25, and they haven't rounded up our wild horses since the 70s. This affects Inyo and Mono County. Local tribes have joined in the fight and are unified. Any advice would be welcomed. We really don't want the helicopters.
Right. So it's great that the tribes are involved. We got the tribes involved here too, so that was good. But also talk to your state and county people and try to get them involved. I know that I did ask one of the legislative staffers that we met with how important petitions were, because I think that that's questionable to a lot of us, right? Like, does it matter? I put my name on there. Does anybody look at it? Does anybody care? And he said, absolutely it is. And then when I said to him, so how many signatures make you care? And he said, one. And I was like, wow. If one person has a concern, that's our job, right? To understand that concern of that citizen. So I think really going back to your state and federal legislators, and again, anyone that you can talk to, get the press involved. A lot of the times the press doesn't know what's happening. Like I said, the way that the park put out their press release, the press had no idea that they were getting rid of the horses because they listed 3 different options. So it was like, yeah, there's going to be horses. They're just going to like cull them like they always do. They didn't realize that. So even some of those things, and I know we've talked about this before, you know, the BLM, the Park Service, the Forest Service put out these press releases that go out, and it makes it sound like, you know, sunshine and roses happening, and it's not. So again, it's our job to educate as many people as we can and talk to as many people as you can.
That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, I think we have made it through. Lots of people are just thanking you, Chris, in case you can't see the chat. Thank you for your leadership and wonderful information. Thank you. Thank you. If anyone else, oh, Heather says, write short letters to the editor and make the public aware too. I think that's great. And just as a little note, on Sunday morning, I'll be doing a presentation on writing letters to the editor and op-eds, in case you are interested in that line of communication. Gina says, thank you. We know Chris is awesome. Does anybody else have any other questions? Throw them in the bottom of the chat. Otherwise, we will wrap up, but I'm sure this will not be the last that you hear from Chris.
Right. And I do also want to let people know, I know I was getting tagged in a lot of posts and comments. People were upset that John Raby has been appointed as director of the BLM. And so we decided, instead of just complaining about this, we did make a one-click call to action. People can send an email to your own legislators saying, hey, we understand this is temporary. We don't want this to be permanent. And those are the things we have to do, you know, as we go through, and we're not sure how things are going to look. We don't know how Doug Burgum's going to be as Secretary of the Interior, right? We all thought Deb Haaland was going to be great, correct? So, but we have to keep speaking up. That's the big thing. We just have to keep speaking up. So.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Chris. Everyone's saying thank you. Teddy Roosevelt would appreciate your effort. Someone says that's really sweet. People are asking how they can stay in touch with you. I've made sure that your website is in the chat, and I know Heather added your website in earlier. It's chwha.org. And there are emails. There's an email address. I think there's a form letter for getting in touch. And also there's a phone number. And I know that Chris will be happy to stay in touch with you, as will all of us. That's why we're all here, right? To share information. Okay, thank you so much. I
you.
think that takes care of it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you, everyone.